Hi, welcome to Right to Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, I want to speak to you about paraphrasing. Now, paraphrasing essentially is changing a sentence into a different sentence, but keeping the same meaning as the original. Okay? Sounds pretty simple, but not that simple. So first, why do we need to paraphrase? Why do writers paraphrase? Why do test takers paraphrase? Mainly, it's to avoid copying somebody else's words. So when you're writing an academic paper in university and you're reading all kinds of books to get all your information, you can't take direct passages from the books you're reading and put them into your essay. That's called plagiarism. It's basically copying. It's illegal. In university, if you're caught doing that, you will be kicked out of school. You will be expelled from the university, high school, whatever. It's just not allowed. Don't do that. Another reason we paraphrase is to add variety to our writing. Sometimes we may need to repeat some information. We'll put it at the beginning of the essay. Maybe we'll need to put it again a little bit later just to emphasize or whatever reason. But we don't want to use the exact same words or the exact same sentences we used before. So we take that information and we write it a different way. But again, we keep the same message as the original. Now, for those of you who are going to take a language test, IELTS, TOEFL, SAT, TOEIC, CAE, any of these tests, they are specifically going to test your ability to at least recognize paraphrases. They want you to do it again. They also want you to do it in the essay. They don't want you to use the question task given to you. They want you to take the task. They want you to paraphrase it into your essay. You can say the same information, use your own words, use your own structures. But especially in the reading sections of these tests, especially the TOEFL and IELTS, they're going to test your paraphrasing skills, your ability to recognize by giving you a sentence in a reading passage and then a question about that information. But the sentence, the way the question is structured is going to be a paraphrase of the passage. So what they are basically testing is your ability to recognize that the two things essentially say the same thing, and therefore you can answer the question. Now, think about TOEFL. Those of you taking the TOEFL, sometimes you have a question like to summarize a passage. They're going to give you a section of the reading. They're going to give you a bunch of sentences and to put them in the correct order to summarize that passage. Those sentences are basically paraphrases of what's in the reading section. They want to see that you understand them, and then you can put the information in the correct order. Okay, so those are the main reasons to paraphrase. Now, here is an example of a paraphrase before we get into the details of how to do it. Small animals, such as rats and birds, are often the victims of predatory animals like cats. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a complete paraphrase. Felines have a tendency to prey on rodents and other small creatures. So in this second sentence, I changed words, I changed structures, I kept the original message. Again, it could be interpreted slightly differently, but the essential message is the same. In the last sentence, I basically took the second sentence, I basically restated it. A restatement is also a paraphrase. Basically, you're keeping everything the same, just changing words around. Cats usually eat mice and other small animals. Cats, felines, tendency usually, mice, rodents, other small creatures, small animals. It basically means the exact same thing, sentences 2 and 3. Now, what are you going to use to paraphrase? It's very simple in terms of your tools, synonyms and antonyms. Synonyms are words that mean the same thing or very similar meaning. Antonyms, words that mean the opposite. So you can use antonyms as well because you're just going to change the structure. I like something means in the paraphrase, I don't dislike something. Again, not a good paraphrase, but still a paraphrase keeps the original meaning. Grammar rules. You must know grammar very well to do paraphrasing. To actively paraphrase a sentence, you need to know grammar very well. To recognize it, you also need to know grammar very well. You have to make sure that the structures and the clauses, the conjunctions, all these things, the way they're constructed, you're still keeping the same meaning. The sentence might look completely different, but the message, the meaning is essentially the same thing. So know your grammar, know your vocabulary. You have to have a lot of vocabulary to be able to paraphrase. Okay, so now how do you paraphrase? Well, again, the most important thing to keep in mind is to know the rules of the language. You need to know how to play with structures, with grammar, with vocab. You need to know how to play with all these things so you can change them around. First thing you want to do is, in any sentence, is identify the independent clause and therefore isolate the sentence's main message. Remember, a sentence can have many clauses, but the independent clause, and usually the first independent clause, in case you have two, the first one will hold the key message, the key idea of the sentence. So make sure you can isolate it, get the central idea, and then everything else is in relation to that idea. Okay? Change as many words as you can. Nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. These can usually be changed pretty easily. Prepositions. If you're changing the order of things, you might need to change the prepositions. A to might need to become a from, etc. Change as many structures as you possibly can, but make sure that the order of the events or the relationships stays the same. In terms of chronology means time. So if A happened first and B happened second, make sure that in your paraphrase, doesn't matter how you construct it, A still happened first and B still happened second. Make sure you don't change the order of events. And make sure relationships don't change. If you have an adverb clause saying showing a contrast, make sure that that contrast is still evident in the paraphrase. Don't lose the relationships. Don't lose the sequence. Okay? You can change active to or from passive. Change an active to a passive. Change a passive to an active. Again, make sure the relationships are all the same. You don't lose the meaning. You don't change the meaning of the paraphrase, of the original sentence, I should say. Change phrases to clauses and vice versa. If you have a phrase, make it a clause. If you have a clause, make it a phrase. But again, always keep in mind the relationships. Let's look at some examples, or one example anyway. Having failed to secure a definitive result from the hundreds of experiments he had conducted, Professor Talbot finally had to resign himself to the fact that his original hypothesis must have been flawed and that he would thus need to begin his investigation from scratch. Now, you're taking this big sentence, which seems a little bit complicated, but it's not once you break it down into its parts. Okay? So you're going to break this down, you're going to find the independent clause and then all the other pieces. Once you isolate them, then you start changing things around. Okay? The independent clause. Professor Talbot finally had to resign himself to something, to the fact. This is your independent clause. You have your subject, your verb, and your had to resign himself. Okay? Had to what? Object. Fact one. So he had the fact. Fact one, his original hypothesis, his original idea, his original premise or notion of what should happen after the experiment must have been flawed. It was incorrect right from the beginning. Based on that fact, the fact that the hypothesis was flawed, he would thus need to begin his investigation from scratch. He needs to start all over again from the beginning, do everything again. Okay? Okay. And then we have finally. So Professor Talbot finally had to resign himself. So when did this finally happen? When was this event? Having failed to secure a definitive result from the hundreds of experiments he had conducted. So after he failed to get his conclusion, he realized that he would have to start all over again. So now that we've broken it up into all the little pieces, let's start changing words around, okay? Independent clause. So we had Professor Talbot finally had to resign himself to something. Professor Talbot finally, ultimately, had no choice, but to admit, to resign himself to. To resign himself to means to admit. So I've changed as many words as I can. Actually, all of them except for his name. Proper names never change. They're proper names. Admission one. So I'm changing the fact to what his admission because I've used the word to admit instead of resign himself to the fact. So his first fact was his original hypothesis must have been flawed. His initial assumption, original hypothesis, was surely mistaken, flawed, mistaken. He would thus need to begin his investigation from scratch. He therefore had to redo his research from the beginning. Everything means exactly the same. I'm basically restating in different words, okay? And then finally having failed to secure a definitive result from the hundreds of experiments he had conducted. Having failed to, this is called a participle phrase. All I'm doing is I'm changing the type of phrase. After hundreds of tests, we're unable to, I'm changing it into a clause, I should say, sorry, an adverb clause. We're unable to bring him to a sure conclusion. Okay, everything's been changed. There you have it all together. After hundreds of tests, we're unable to bring him to a sure conclusion, ... So far, I haven't touched the structures. I've only changed the words. But now, I'm going to show you how I've taken the exact same initial sentence and changed it to structures and vocabulary. Professor Talbot, whose hundreds of experiments did not lead to any sure conclusion, had to concede at last that his starting hypothesis was faulty and would require rethinking. Now, first thing you have to notice, I changed the order. I put the independent clause subject first, Professor Talbot, whose hundreds of experiments. I used an adjective clause now instead of a participle phrase. I'm using the word hypothesis because it's a very apt word. There's no need to change it. If you have a word that is the best word for the situation, use it. You don't have to change every single word. If a word is fitting, use it. Now, another word about changing vocabulary. Sometimes you just can't. For example, if you're trying to paraphrase something that includes the words parents, okay? Parents don't have, the word parents doesn't have many synonyms. You can say mother and father. You could stretch it and say guardians, but that's pretty much as far as you can go. In that case, just use parents, parents, parents as much and as often as you need, because there's not that many synonyms. You don't have that many synonyms. You don't have that many options. Okay? So don't worry about that. But look at the structures. Look how they've changed. Look at the vocabulary that's changed. This sentence means the same as the original sentence I showed you before. Okay? So in review, how to paraphrase. Understand the sentence, change the wording, restructure it, reorder it, make sure you keep the same meaning all the way from beginning to end, original and paraphrase. That's it. Very simple. I mean, it's not very simple, but it's not very difficult once you practice it a little bit. Now, if you want to practice this on your own, what I always recommend, find yourself a good article online or in a newspaper or magazine, read it, and summarize it. When you're doing the summary, all you're doing is you're taking like a 4 or 5 paragraph article and squeezing it into one paragraph. What you want to do is keep the gist. You want to keep the general idea. Don't worry too much about details, but don't use any of the language that they used in the article. Use your own language, use your own words, your own sentence structures. Write a summary and make sure that if a person reads your summary, they will understand the same idea as if they read the original article. Okay? That's the best practice to do this. Another way is to just read anything. Like if you're doing IELTS or TOEFL, just take practice reading samples. Just take a paragraph and just start going through every sentence, cutting it into pieces, analyzing it, find all your independent clauses, find all your relationships, your sequences, your chronology, etc. And then start playing around with it, see what you can do with that. If you have any questions about this, please ask below here in YouTube or my Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. And please go to writetotop.com. You can find out more information there about paraphrasing and see some more samples there. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel here and come back again soon for more videos to help you improve your writing. See ya.